Okay, I'm here with Rasika Mohan from CARDNO Emerging Market. Today we are going to have a conversation about GRC and sustainability. Hi, Rasika.
Hi, Fadjar. Nice to be here.
Nice meeting you. So, we want to know about what's your opinion about GRC, since you have an international perspective. Would you share with us what the GRC and why it's important?
Yeah, certainly. So CARDNO is a global firm that looks at environmental and social well-being across the globe. And in our experience, we found that to enable sustainable development, one of the fundamental factors that we need to consider is the integration of governance, risk and compliance considerations into the way ecosystems and enabling environments are structured, and in turn how companies operate. And so it's very, very exciting for me to be at this event this year, and to see the concerted focus that all of the Indonesian stakeholders are actually making, and the importance that's being given not just to GRC but to the integrated and holistic approach to GRC. And so in terms of our global perspective, why it's important, governance in the first instance enables the development of sound, holistic and sustainable policy, and in turn regulation, which is the bedrock of how societies can function sustainably, number one. And once companies, as well as the government, starts looking at the fiduciary duties of the ecosystem, risk follows inherently. And risk is a really, really important enabler to build business resilience, economic resilience and social resilience. And so I think governance enables that to be considered. I think the third thing that I'd say is, of course, globally, compliance is something that's mandated by legislation and regulation. But compliance provides you with great baseline systems and baseline practices that again enable prosperous, just and holistic and sustainable communities. And that's what we want, and I think that's what Indonesia wants. So it's very promising to see this concerted focus in Indonesia towards GRC.
Okay, very good. Then why it is very important to put the correlations between governance, risk and compliance to sustainability?
Yeah, definitely. So in our work at CARDNO and within emerging markets specifically, we see a number of trends, and I'm sure that the Indonesian community would be aware of these trends as well. If you look at society in general, the consumer is demanding sustainable products manufactured and distributed by sustainable companies. That's the first. The second is, if we look at staff and employee morale, there's a rise of the millennial generation. And millennials care about this stuff. They're very, very passionate about being a global citizen as well as a social citizen as well. I think the third thing is there's that generational wealth transfer between the baby boomers, so perhaps your parents and my parents, to the millennials of today. And so they're going to be making some very strong investment decisions about where they put their money. And so that's one aspect. The second trend that I would say is that the market is actually pricing sustainability. So we're finding that over 80% of investors are actually integrating sustainability, or what we would call environmental, social and governance considerations, into how they make investment decisions. And so it's not just a nice to have anymore. It's not a corporate social responsibility activity. It's fundamental to the way companies live, breathe and operate. The other thing that we would say is, given that the market is actually pricing sustainability, investors aren't just looking at voluntary disclosure from companies anymore. What they're looking at is sustainability based on hard evidence. So we've got the the mainstream adoption of artificial intelligence and big data, which means that investment decisions can be made in a more transparent way. I don't think we're fully transparent yet, but we're certainly on the way to being so. And so there's definitely that market consideration from a sustainability perspective. If you look at the system and the way in which system-related factors interact with each other, we believe that it starts with leadership. And I'm talking about leadership at the personal level. I'm talking about leadership within the government, leadership within business, within boards, at all levels, again, in our ecosystem. And so that leadership actually leads to great policy and regulation, which then leads to governance, risk and compliance, which then leads to companies being risk aware. And in the quest to mitigate risks, a company or an individual starts to innovate. And with that innovation comes creativity, comes competitive advantage, comes business resilience, which then has a flow-on effect in terms of performance, in terms of share price. There's evidence to show that companies which do integrate GRC and GRC or sustainability considerations have lower costs of capital, but have evidence of higher performance from a profitability perspective, and also there's an intangible element of brand value that's being priced into the share price. I think the last thing that I'd say is it's not something that you can't do anymore. Meaning that it's not a discretionary measure to mitigate risk. There are examples around the globe of large multinational companies that are able to mitigate certain risks which have resulted in, for instance, large environmental disasters which have a direct impact on their share price. So I think there's a values-based argument as well as a risk-based argument or a compliance-based argument for the company to consider.
Okay, very good. Now, in terms of that you can build this sustainability with the GRC, is there any probably some steps for our audience that can follow from that 2 steps that you can give explanations?
So the promising thing and the very exciting thing about Indonesia is you've got a progressive government which has taken some pretty strong steps in the commitment to governance, risk and compliance as well as sustainability. If you take the recent legislation that was passed by the OJK to make sustainability reporting mandatory for listed organisations as well as private companies, it's very, very promising. And you're finding that there's the credit rating agencies have actually recognised the progressiveness of the government, and in turn, the credit ratings of Indonesia have actually been moved up a notch, which is really, really exciting. And so there's a lot of incentive for the Indonesian business community to innovate. You have the largest injection of impact investment capital in Indonesia over the last, I think, 10 or so years. So if we then bring ourselves to the question of what it is that you can tangibly do, what we advise our clients to do is probably 3 main things. First is to understand the ecosystem in which you operate. So understand the drivers, behaviours of the stakeholders that influence your business and your community. And we're talking about a global world, right? We're not just talking about Indonesia anymore. The second is what we call the creation of shared value. So really to explore the intersection of where business capability and business talent can intersect with the creation of social value in a commercially viable way. And I think the third would be recognizing that, within Indonesia, you have organizations that are at varying levels of maturity as well as in terms of their corporate structure. Start small. Have a think big, but take tangible steps that are relevant to your own organization.
One step at a time.
One step at a time, exactly. That doesn't mean that you lose the end goal and the end picture.
The big objective.
The big objective, exactly. You do need to think big. At the same time, you have to walk before you can leap or run, I guess. So those would be our three very high level pieces of advice, I guess.
Well, that's a very good advice. Yeah, but for our closure, probably you have some message for our audience. How important the GRCs are, probably what strong message that probably you have experienced.
Yeah, definitely. Look, we believe that it's, again, as I said before, it's very, very promising that there's events like this summit that are taking place in Indonesia, and we believe that governance, risk and compliance is the fundamental building block to actually creating more sustainable communities, economies and society as a whole. So that's probably it.
Yes, that's very good message that you've given to our audience. So I thank you very much for this conversation. So I believe this is going to be a very good benefit for our audience. So thank you. This is our conversations with Rasika Mohan from CARDNO Emerging Market.